A childhood shadowed in darkness. Emily's earliest memories were suffused with warmth, the golden California sun streaming through the kitchen window, her mother humming lullabies as she cooked, and her father's laughter echoing down the modest hallway of their family home. They lived in the sleepy suburb of Petaluma, a town that, for all its smallness, brimmed with cozy neighborhoods and backyard swing sets. In those first years, Emily's world was whole, her sense of belonging complete and undisturbed. But everything changed one autumn when Emily was just 6 years old. Her mother, once so vibrant, fell ill with a sickness that crept in silently and stole her light away. The cheerful sounds in the house faded. Emily, too young to fully grasp mortality, watched her mother wither. She clung to her father, a gentle man who trembled beneath the weight of the coming loss. When her mother finally passed, a gaping silence settled in, heavy and consuming. Time blurred. Grief was replaced by a strange new routine. Her father working extra shifts, Emily learning to fend for herself in ways a child never should. For nearly a year, life felt like an endless rainy afternoon. Then Linda arrived. She was introduced as an old friend of her father's, but soon the smiles and Sunday dinners faded into more. Linda moved into the house, bringing silent judgments and a stepdaughter Emily's age named Chloe. At first, Linda was kindly, always ready with a smile and polite questions. Emily hoped she would fill the hollow space left by her mother. The hope was short-lived. Small slights began to pile up. Linda's tone grew colder, her instructions sharper. Dinners became tense. Praise was reserved for Chloe, while Emily's smallest mistakes sparked a harsh glare. Emily was frequently compared to Chloe, her clothes less tidy, her grades not as perfect, her manners lacking. Linda corrected Emily for things she had never been taught and criticized her in front of guests. But behind closed doors, the reproaches turned into punishments. Lost privileges, added chores, even cold stares that lingered long after words stopped. Emily's father, worn down by grief and Linda's insistence that structure was good for Emily, didn't notice, or chose not to see, the change. He was busy, tired, and grateful for Linda's help. Linda took over the household. She set the rules, decided who could speak and when, chose what Emily would wear and eat. The home Emily once knew was transformed. She lost her small freedoms, the privilege of choosing her own snacks, the comfort of bedtime stories, and most crushing of all, the feeling that she genuinely belonged. Linda's control was absolute. She orchestrated morning routines, inspected lunchboxes with a meticulous eye, and demanded absolute obedience. Chloe joined in, sometimes out of rivalry, sometimes simply to please her mother, echoing Linda's criticisms or tattling on Emily for trivial things. Friends drifted away, sensing the tension in Emily's home when they visited. Emily stopped inviting them over. At school, she grew quieter, tentative, afraid that anything she said or did would somehow get back to Linda. The ache of injustice simmered inside her. Why was she always at fault, always doubted, always less than? One afternoon, as Emily lingered alone in the backyard, she tried to summon the memory of her mother's voice, but found it slipping away. She realized, with a pang, that she was no longer a cherished daughter, but an afterthought in her own home. This was the landscape of Emily's childhood. Silence replacing laughter, suspicion crowding out trust, and every corner of her world slowly claimed by someone who, beneath a veneer of kindness, made sure she always felt small and out of place. Isolation and suffering. If Emily had once believed that the coldness of her home would subside with time, she soon discovered she was wrong. As the months blurred into years, her sense of isolation grew deeper. and the boundaries of her loneliness expanded with each passing day. Linda, now firmly in control of the household, began to spin subtle stories around Emily. Little comments to her father about Emily's supposed unruliness or lack of gratitude. "She needs more structure, more discipline," Linda would say with a sigh, her eyes downcast, painting herself as the well-meaning stepmother burdened by an ungrateful child. At first, Emily's father merely nodded, distracted and exhausted. But repetition bred belief. Over time, he grew distant, uncertain, less likely to defend Emily as Linda's complaints echoed nightly over dinner. This gradual erosion of trust became apparent in small, devastating ways. Once, Emily forgot to finish a chore before school, a trivial oversight for a child her age. Linda seized on the mistake, declaring at the breakfast table, "See, she never listens. I keep telling you, she ignores everything I say." Her father's silence felt heavier than any scolding. Emily's explanations didn't matter. Her voice seemed to vanish in the space between them, unheard. Chloe, Linda's daughter, drifted closer to her mother's side, the lines between us and her drawn more boldly now. Chloe imitated her mother's tone, rolling her eyes and complaining loudly whenever Emily was around. She tattled for the smallest infractions, certain of instant validation. At school, Chloe made friends easily, her laugh ringing out in hallways Emily passed through with lowered eyes. The home, Emily's supposed safe space, became an arena where every misstep was reported, every effort minimized, and every apology dismissed. The household responsibilities shifted almost entirely onto Emily's shoulders: laundry, cleaning, yard work, watching her younger step-siblings when Linda went out. When things went wrong, a broken dish, an unfinished homework assignment, Linda deftly twisted the narrative until Emily stood alone in blame. "Why can't you be more like Chloe?" Linda would whisper so only Emily could hear. Emily tried to reach out. She confided in a favorite teacher, her words trembling but hopeful. The teacher listened and offered brief comfort, but without clear evidence, nothing changed at home. Later, Emily found that even her few school friends grew distant. They stopped coming over after birthday parties shifted from cheerful chaos to somber affairs under Linda's stern eye. Invitations dried up, and lunchtime became a quiet ordeal. At night, Emily heard muffled conversations behind her bedroom door, her name almost always included, never with kindness. The isolation became a living thing, wrapping itself around her, squeezing her world smaller. She lost the confidence to speak up, the urge to argue her innocence, even the desire to defend herself. An incident one dreary Thursday marked a new low. The family's treasured heirloom, a porcelain vase, was shattered, and Linda didn't hesitate a moment in accusing Emily. "It couldn't have been anyone else. She's always so careless," Linda insisted, her eyes sharp. Without question, Emily's father sided with Linda, grounding Emily for a month and canceling the rare outing she'd looked forward to for weeks. That night, staring at the ceiling and listening to Chloe's laughter in the next room, Emily wondered if life would always feel this lonely. Thoughts of escape passed through her mind, running away, writing a letter to Child Protection Services, pleading for help from neighbors. Each attempt ended the same way: hesitation, fear of consequence, or pleadings dismissed as exaggeration. By the time Emily turned 15, the gap between herself and her family felt unbridgeable. She moved through the halls of her home with careful silence, existing more as a shadow than a daughter. Yet inside, a small spark of anger burned hotter with each injustice. Emily kept her head down, bearing the weight of blame and loneliness, but the ache of that unfairness began to turn into something harder, sharper. A quiet resolve that someday she would find a way out. Rising independence. Emily approached her 16th birthday, carrying the battered heart of a survivor and the quiet, unbreakable determination of someone who had endured far too much, far too young. By now, the family home felt less like shelter and more like a daily gauntlet. Linda's authority had only tightened over the years, her rules filling every hour, her presence pressing down on Emily until even breathing felt regulated. But beneath Linda's relentless control, a new force quietly awakened inside Emily. A deep need to reclaim her life and shape her own future, even if she had to do it alone. Her junior year, Emily's academic talent began to shine through, in spite of the stony silence at home. School became her refuge. She lost herself in science labs and late nights hunched over library tables, the pages of textbooks, and the encouragement of a handful of dedicated teachers offering her a small measure of validation. Ms. Sanderson, her English teacher, noticed not only Emily's skill, but her hunger to excel. When Ms. Sanderson slipped her a brochure for a scholarship writing competition, Emily's hands trembled as she tucked it secretly into her backpack, the first sliver of hope in years. Linda, however, dismissed any ambition Emily voiced. "What's the point in dreaming?" she'd say, shoving a basket of laundry Emily's way. "You'll never be as good as Chloe anyway. Colleges don't want girls like you. Nobody does." She even tried to block Emily from participating in debate club or after-school study sessions, insisting her chores took priority. But Emily, desperate for any taste of freedom, squeezed homework and extracurricular activities into howling midnight hours, hiding her achievements and letters of recommendation under loose floorboards in her tiny bedroom. Knowing she couldn't count on financial support or even a word of encouragement from her family, Emily scoured the local paper for after-school jobs. She landed work stocking shelves at a grocery store, where the evening manager, Mrs. Patel, offered not only a paycheck, but open, gentle conversation. For the first time in years, someone asked, "How are you?" and waited for a real answer. The job paid little, but the independence it gave her was priceless. She bought her own second-hand clothes, kept a slim jar of savings beneath her bed, and sometimes even treated herself to a warm cinnamon roll at the diner on her way home from late shifts. A few classmates slowly became friends. Not the kind who dropped by her house, but those who would trade sandwiches with her at lunch and encourage her with silent, understanding smiles. Sam, a neighbor boy in her AP history class, started walking her home some evenings. He talked about wanting to escape Petaluma too, and their shared dreams bloomed quietly in the faded dusk. Despite exhaustion and constant pressure from home, Emily's grades soared. Her counselors, seeing a rare grit, nominated her for City Youth Awards and linked her with local professionals for mentorship. These glimmers of recognition felt like secret oxygen. Linda grew suspicious of Emily's late hours and growing independence. She sometimes threatened to bar Emily from working, accusing her of trying to shame the family, or even hiding her shoes to keep her from leaving the house. But Emily learned how to outmaneuver the threats. She pretended compliance, then worked harder, smarter, returning home so late that even Linda had given up waiting to scold her. In the spring of her senior year, a letter arrived that changed everything. Emily had been accepted to the University of California, Berkeley, her dream school, on a full scholarship. Her hands shook so violently as she opened the envelope that the thin paper nearly tore. For the first time, tears of relief slid down her cheeks. She could finally, truly, imagine a way out. Linda's reaction was swift and cold. "If you set foot out of this house, don't expect a single cent from us. Don't come crawling back when you fail." Chloe watched with detached curiosity, already planning her own future as her mother's golden child. Emily packed light. With a single worn-out suitcase and a battered backpack, she left Petaluma before summer even ended, a barely averted glance exchanged with her father. Silent, distant, but not as blind as he once pretended to be. He pressed a $20 bill into Emily's hand. Rough, but wordless, as though that was all he dared offer. Emily stepped onto the bus that would carry her toward the city and her second act. For the first time, as the sun slipped behind the hills, Petaluma's shadows no longer reached her. Her independence was hard won, but it was hers alone, and as the miles sped past, she stared out the window and allowed herself to hope for something more than just surviving. Leaving the past behind. The city air tasted impossibly new, tinged with the scent of bus exhaust, roasted street corn, and possibility. Emily's first morning in Berkeley was as far from Petaluma as she could have imagined. The unfamiliar clamor of car horns and shouting students, the press of bodies on the sidewalk, the distant music from an open dorm window. Even the sunlight seemed different here. Not the gentle golden glow of her childhood yard, but a sharper, restless brilliance that illuminated every imperfection and detail. Standing alone on the cracked concrete, clutching her battered suitcase, Emily wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. There was no one to meet her. There was no welcome home, no loving arms, just the cold, exhilarating terror of absolute freedom. She could go anywhere, do anything, and all at once, the endless choices felt like a weight. Her dorm room was minuscule but private, the walls blank except for neatly printed fire escape instructions taped beside the door. She hung the single photograph she'd brought from Petaluma on a nail above her desk, a faded snapshot of her, age 4, laugh buried in her mother's arms. The room's silence pressed close, yet it felt safe. That night, lying on the narrow twin bed, Emily let herself cry for the first time in months. Tears for the comfort she'd never had, for the mother she'd lost, and for the girl she once was. The first weeks at Berkeley were a blur of orientation meetings, campus maps, and introductions. Her assigned roommate, Priya, was a whirlwind of bright scarves and louder opinions, a business major from San Diego, with a knack for friendship and a family that called every other night. Priya immediately tried to draw Emily into her social world. Late-night pizza runs, sprawling study groups, spontaneous karaoke sessions. Emily, shy and cautious, smiled politely, but kept her distance. Years of learned invisibility were hard to shed in a single autumn. Yet isolation was different here. It was a solitude she could claim for herself. Not punishment, but privacy. Emily threw herself into her classes. Chemistry labs that smelled of acetone and promise. English lectures where her thoughtful essays caught her professor's eyes. Each quiet success became a foothold, a reminder that her old life didn't define her. Her future could be sculpted by her own hands. Adapting, however, was anything but easy. Money was always tight. The scholarship paid for tuition and housing, but books, meals, and daily essentials demanded careful budgeting. Emily picked up shifts in the campus library and sometimes filled in at a nearby cafe, the hours stacking up until exhaustion pulsed behind her eyes. She learned to get creative with groceries, noodles, eggs, canned beans, and to say no when friends invited her out, even when she longed to say yes. Loneliness would gnaw at her, especially on weekends when roommates vanished homeward to sunlit kitchens and loving parents. Berkeley, for all its vibrancy, could feel mercilessly indifferent to those who had nowhere else to land. Emily allowed herself moments of envy and grief, writing unsent letters to her mother, or simply wandering the city at dusk, lingering by shop windows and warming her hands with takeout coffee. One thing she did permit herself was the quiet joy of the campus gardens. On Sundays, when the library was quiet and her classmates were hungover or away, she'd navigate winding stone paths and settle on a bench beneath the redwoods. Here, surrounded by towering trees and hummingbirds, Emily read poetry or composed fragments of letters she might one day send to her father. The city's endless momentum paused, and she could simply breathe. There were stumbles. In her second semester, a calculus grade slipped precariously. The panic that followed was all too familiar. A cold sweat, a tightening in her chest, old voices whispering that she wasn't good enough. Emily struggled sleepless through problem sets, and for the first time, sought help. Her teaching assistant, a gentle graduate student named David, listened patiently before offering guidance and encouragement without condescension. When she finally aced her next exam, the pride was new and startling. The victory belonged to her alone. Despite her gentle distance, some friendships began to take root. Priya, respectful of Emily's boundaries, became an unexpected anchor, checking in, sharing snacks, wordlessly leaving encouraging sticky notes on the bathroom mirror before big exams. There was also Hannah from her chemistry group, who once confided that her own family was broken by secrets and bruises, and who instinctively understood the shadows in Emily's past. Long walks beneath the campus oaks, honest confessions over microwaved soup. These small intimacies slowly chipped away at Emily's old habit of self-concealment. By her sophomore year, Emily had started to look at herself differently in the mirror. Not as the frightened shadow of a mistreated child, but as a young woman with scars and strength in equal measure. She volunteered as a campus peer mentor, quietly offering guidance and kindness to first-year students who arrived as lost as she had been. She learned the language of self-advocacy, convincing the financial aid office to approve a supplemental grant when her work hours threatened her grades. The process empowered her in ways Linda's smothering rules never had. Occasionally, the past crept up on her, late at night, in dreams where her mother's face blurred into Linda's, or in the trembling moment before opening a tuition bill. Sometimes, a flash of anger would surface when she overheard classmates complain about trivial family squabbles or take their parents' support for granted. But with every semester that passed, the hope inside her grew stronger than the ache. Emily's achievements began to accumulate: a research assistant position in a molecular biology lab, an invitation to present at a regional academic conference, a feature in a campus magazine about scholarship recipients who had overcome adversity. She clipped the article, mailed it to her old high school English teacher, and carefully saved a copy for herself. A record of how far she'd managed to come. The more she accomplished, the more distant Petaluma and the shadows of Linda's abuse seemed. Still, Emily never forgot the injustices she'd endured. They did not disappear, but instead became part of the foundation she was building. She realized, gradually, that her resilience was not just stubbornness, but a quiet defiance, a refusal to let bitterness claim her. In the rare moments when her thoughts turned to her father and the family she'd left behind, Emily felt a dizzying blend of relief and sorrow. She neither hated nor longed for reconciliation. Instead, she focused on living in the present, careful not to let old wounds reopen. A pivotal moment arrived in her junior year when Emily was invited to speak at a First and Family event for the college's underprivileged students. Standing behind the podium, scanning a crowd of hopeful yet tentative faces, Emily spoke of survival, not as a destination, but as a journey. She described her first night in the city, the loneliness that felt like drowning, and the way each small victory was a step toward freedom. "Your past doesn't tell the story of your entire life," she said, her voice clear and steady. "And you get to write every new chapter." Afterward, a nervous freshman lingered to thank her, voice trembling as she admitted she'd planned to drop out. Emily listened, remembering her own fear, and offered the affirmation she'd once craved but never received. That night, Emily walked back to her apartment smiling. For the first time in years, she dreamed not of her old home, but of a future entirely her own. rebirth, and success. By the time Emily crossed the stage to receive her college diploma, the auditorium pulsed with applause and the electric relief of hundreds of futures beginning at once. Standing at the center in her borrowed gown, garlanded with the blue and gold cords of academic distinction, she searched the crowd for a familiar face and saw none. And yet, for the first time in her life, the emptiness of the moment did not define her. She felt, within the clamor and the chaos, an anchor of self-worth that was no longer rooted in anyone's approval but her own. The years following graduation blurred into a new kind of intensity. The world outside Berkeley demanded a fiercer energy and offered no guarantees. But Emily was practiced at forging hope from uncertainty. She stepped into the city's current with sharp alertness and unwavering resolve, taking each rejection and every small win as material to shape her future. Her first job, with a pioneering biotech startup in San Francisco, landed in her lap after a nerve-wracking interview. The office itself was a chaotic blend of mismatched chairs and laptops propped on stacks of journals, and the excitement in the air felt almost adolescent. Emily, among the youngest on staff, was thrown directly into the fray, troubleshooting assays late at night, learning to code on the fly, deciphering dense scientific literature far beyond her undergraduate years. It was exhilarating and exhausting. She welcomed the challenge, not because she felt ready, but because she had learned, long ago, that waiting for permission or ideal circumstances led nowhere. Money was still a challenge. Her starting salary was modest compared to the city's sky-high rents. But Emily was thrifty, making simple home-cooked meals and sharing a tiny apartment with 2 other women from her college honors program. The 3 became each other's makeshift family, trading stories after long days and supporting each other through heartbreak, illness, and celebration. There were nights when they sat on the fire escape under the fog-clouded sky, sharing takeout and dreams, and Emily realized she was finally building the kind of support network she had craved as a child. Professional recognition came gradually. Emily dove into her work with the quiet focus of someone who had always needed to prove herself, whether to an indifferent family or to a skeptical world. She published her first paper as co-author within a year, an achievement that once would have seemed unreachable. The team celebrated with dollar store cupcakes and a bottle of cheap sparkling wine in the break room, but Emily took her copy of the journal home that night and pressed it into her scrapbook, proof for herself alone. But her newfound success was not without cost. High-pressure environments brought back the old currents of self-doubt and anxiety, sometimes pulling her back to the shame and suspicion of her past. There were times when her supervisor's critical feedback sent her spiraling into overwork, desperate to erase the possibility of being not enough. Old triggers, the sharp tone of a manager, the exclusion from a team meeting, overheard jokes at her expense, could return her, in a heartbeat, to the cold kitchen table of her youth. But each episode grew shorter, less convincing. Emily learned, slowly, to confront these moments with the patience and self-compassion she extended so readily to others. Gradually, her professional confidence bled into other parts of her life. Friends noticed the change. The way Emily spoke up in meetings, the decisiveness with which she planned group trips, the warmth she radiated in conversation. She joined a local running club, motivated not by speed, but by community, and started volunteering on weekends with a nonprofit mentoring girls in STEM. Over coffee, she shared stories with young women whose questions brimmed with the same apprehension and hope she had once felt. Mentoring them became both a responsibility and a source of healing, proof of how far she'd come. Romance found its way into Emily's life with disarming gentleness. She met Alex at a trivia night hosted by mutual friends, a software engineer with a dry sense of humor and a remarkable talent for listening. Their early dates were humble: walks through foggy city parks, dollar movie nights, shared pizza after exhausting days. What set Alex apart was his patience. He never pushed her to share before she was ready. Over time, Emily found herself letting go of old defenses, allowing herself to be known in ways she had never dared before. Still, there were moments when the ache of the past returned. Sometimes, when Alex's family invited her for holidays and treated her with the easy warmth of kinship, Emily felt an inexplicable sense of panic, a fear that it might be taken away, as so much had been. There were other days, minor setbacks at work, or a harsh word from a supervisor, that threatened to flood her with old pain. But Emily faced each wave with the tools she had gathered: reflection, conversation, the certainty that her worth could not be decided by others. With the stability of a full-time job and a blossoming social circle, Emily allowed herself to dream bigger. She enrolled in night classes to sharpen her professional skills, eventually developing an idea for a small biotech spin-off that merged her love of research and public health outreach. Her proposal impressed a group of angel investors, and before she could second-guess herself, Emily was leading her own small team, a role that would have once terrified her. She fostered a culture of collaboration and kindness, determined that in her company, no one would ever feel as voiceless or invisible as she once had. The business flourished modestly, but what mattered most to Emily was the way her team treated one another. She watched friendships bloom in her office, watched young, nervous hires grow into outspoken leaders, and realized she was creating the kind of environment she had rarely known, one built on trust rather than domination, on encouragement rather than blame. There were still quiet nights when Emily remembered Petaluma, the swing set rusting in the backyard, the echo of her mother's lullabies, and the tension that had crept through every room after Linda's arrival. But those memories, while still sorrowful, no longer defined her sense of self. For the first time, she began to forgive, not to excuse, but to release the power that old injustices had held over her. She reached out occasionally to her step-siblings and heard updates of their lives with a gentle curiosity, no longer tethered to the sharp edge of resentment. Surrounded by friends, colleagues, and the budding promise of a new life's chapter, Emily finally understood that success meant more than awards or bank balances. Her greatest victory was simply this: to believe in her own worth, to build, a day at a time, the joyful, resilient community she had always deserved. No longer a shadow in her own story, Emily stood at the center, illuminated by the life she had created. Each new day an act of quiet, hard-won triumph. Bad news from the old family. The routine of Emily's life had settled into something warm, purposeful, and proud. A comfortable rhythm pulsed through her days. Busy mornings managing her team at the biotech startup, afternoons spent troubleshooting experiments or mentoring interns, and evenings filled with laughter at shared dinners with Alex and friends. Her San Francisco apartment was small but cheerful, and sunlight pooled on the kitchen floor as she brewed coffee each morning, a quiet contrast to the gray shadows that had once haunted her childhood. In these peaceful times, the ghosts of Petaluma grew faint, as if they belonged to someone else's memories. But a single phone call, unannounced and urgent, was enough to rip open those old wounds. Emily was on her lunch break at a crowded cafe, sorting through spreadsheets on her laptop, when the unknown number flashed across her screen. Her first instinct was to ignore it, but something, intuition, dread, made her answer. The voice on the other end was sharp and familiar. "Emily, it's Linda." Even now, Years removed from her stepmother's authority, that name sent a cold current down Emily's spine. Before Emily could respond, Linda continued, her voice brittle and clipped. Your father is very sick. The doctors say it might be a matter of days, not weeks. She paused, then pressed on, her words laced with implication. He keeps asking about you. I thought you should know. Emily's hand shook as she set down her fork. Memories surged. Her father's bowed head at the dinner table, the scent of motor oil when he hugged her after long shifts, his smile, rare and shy, in the years before grief and exhaustion had dulled it, pressed her eyes closed, battling the swirl of anger, guilt, and confusion that knotted painfully in her chest. Emily, did you hear me? I need you to come home to help with all of this. Linda's tone was not quite pleading, more like a demand disguised as concern, the edge of manipulation never far beneath the surface. I'll think about it, Emily managed, her voice barely above a whisper. The call ended abruptly, Linda's final instructions ringing in Emily's ears. Call me when you're ready to be responsible. For the rest of the day, Emily moved in a fog. She tried to return to her usual focus at work, but found herself glancing at the clock, replaying the call, her mind trapped between the life she'd built and the life she'd left behind. That night, Alex noticed her silence as they made dinner together, his hand reaching for hers across the table. Is everything okay? He asked, coaxing her to share the weight she carried. Emily stared into her plate, haunted by memories that felt both ancient and raw. My dad, he's sick. Dying, maybe. Linda called. She wants me to come back. The words sounded foreign in the safe haven of her current life. Alex waited, never rushing her, and finally said, Do you want to go? That question, so simple, so compassionate, tore open a hidden ache inside her. Did she want to return? Did she owe her father that? Rage and sorrow warred within her, tangled up with all the years of silent blame, the nights spent longing for protection, or even just acknowledgement, from the one parent she was supposed to trust. For days, Emily wandered through her routines, distracted and irritable. She found herself snapping at colleagues, losing track of emails, drifting off mid-conversation. Each time her phone vibrated, she stared at it in dread of another message from Linda. She replayed her father's absence during the worst years, how he had sided with Linda, overlooked her pain, shut his eyes to her suffering. But beneath that raw hurt pulsed something more complicated, a stubborn, lingering love for the man who'd once made her pancakes on Sunday mornings, patched up her bike, taught her how to read a map. Family ties, Emily realized, were complicated things, not easily burned, not easily mended. The next call from Linda came late in the evening with the kind of practiced urgency that made Emily's skin crawl. He keeps asking about you, Linda insisted, guilt pressed into every syllable. He just wants to see you, Emily, before it's too late. And honestly, things have been hard on all of us. You used to be part of this family. Don't you feel any responsibility? Emily listened without responding, her heart wrestling with old reflexes. In the past, she would have folded beneath Linda's pressure, sacrificing her own well-being to keep peace, to be seen as good. Now she sat upright, voice steady. I'll make my decision when I'm ready, she said. It was the first time she felt true control in a conversation with her stepmother. That night, sleep eluded her. Emily paced her living room, replaying the possible futures, flying back to Petaluma only to be ensnared in Linda's web once again, or staying away and living forever with the guilt of not saying goodbye. Grief for her father's impending death mingled with fury. At him, at Linda, at herself for not being able to let go completely. She confided everything to Alex, laying bare her ambivalence and pain. He listened with unwavering patience. "What kind of person would I be if I didn't go?" Emily murmured in the dark. "But what if going just means inviting more hurt?" Alex squeezed her hand. "You can choose what you get from this. You don't owe anyone the right to use you, but you get to decide what kind of closure you want." Days passed before Emily made her decision. She sorted through old photographs, the kind she'd hidden for years in dusty boxes. Snapshots of her as a child. Her father lifting her high on his shoulders. The small smile he wore after her elementary school spelling bee. The pain was sharp, but what lingered was a sense of unfinished business, an ache for the compassion she had always longed to give and receive. "I think I have to go," she told Alex at last. "Not for Linda, and not even really for my father, for myself. I need to prove that I can look them in the eye and walk away whole." The next morning, Emily called Linda to say she'd visit for the weekend. She made arrangements at work, packed a small bag, this time with the quiet confidence of someone who knew where they belonged. Before leaving, she slipped that beloved photo of her mother into her wallet. A secret talisman of hope, a reminder of her origins and resilience. On the train north, Emily stared out the window as city melted into farmland, then old familiar towns. With every passing mile, she repeated a silent promise. She would face whatever waited in Petaluma, not as a victim, but as someone who had finally learned her own worth. Facing the return. The town of Petaluma looked much the same as when Emily had left. The sky wore the same lazy blue. The coffee shop on the corner still advertised scones in the window. And the old willow in the park behind her childhood home cast its sprawling shade just as she remembered. But as Emily stepped off the train, suitcase in hand, she felt impossibly changed. A different creature now inhabiting familiar streets. Each step toward her old house was harder than the last. Her lungs seemed to shrink, the closer she got to the place where so much pain had lived. She slowed as she reached the gate, half expecting the hinges to groan in protest as she pushed it open. The yard, once wild with her mother's sunflowers and laughter, had become austere, trimmed to impersonal neatness. Linda was already waiting at the door, arms folded across her chest, mouth stiff with a smile that never reached her eyes. "There you are," she greeted, voice sharp as the click of her heels on the porch. "We weren't sure you'd show." Emily's heart thudded, but she stood tall. "I said I would." Inside, the house felt smaller, its walls crowded with framed pictures of Chloe and the step-siblings, but none of Emily. The air was thick with the palpable history of unspoken things. Chloe stood near the stairwell, gaze flitting to Linda for approval. The step-siblings, older now, sat perched at the edge of the living room, uncertain whether to greet Emily or avoid her entirely. Only her father was missing, confined to his bedroom by the weight of illness. "Your father has been asking," Linda said, tone carefully controlled. She led Emily down the darkened hall, the others watching with a mix of curiosity and wariness. It had been years, but Emily felt the old lines of division, us and her, draw themselves once more. In the room, her father seemed ghost-like, frail, shrunken by pain, but his eyes flickered to life as she entered. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence buzzed with memories and regret. "Hi, Dad," Emily managed, her voice trembling only slightly. He smiled the smallest smile, one she remembered from distant years. "Emily, you're here." They spoke awkwardly at first, conversation tangled in guilt and years of separation. Her father tried to apologize, words stumbling over old wounds. He spoke of being blind, of failing her, of allowing Linda to shape his vision of Emily into something distorted and unkind. He seemed smaller than ever, a man unraveling at his life's edge, desperate to make sense of his choices before it was too late. Linda soon interrupted, her presence dominating the room. "He shouldn't get upset," she said, her eyes skating coldly over Emily. "We don't need to dredge up the past." But Emily, older now, steadier, met Linda's gaze without flinching. "He deserves honesty. We all do." A heavy silence settled over the house the rest of that day, everything simmering under the surface. Over dinner, Linda directed the conversation with calculated sweetness, painting herself as the glue that had held the family together, occasionally shooting veiled jabs at Emily for having missed so much. Yet subtle cracks appeared. The step-siblings, now old enough to challenge old narratives, exchanged uncertain glances. Chloe, fidgeting, seemed almost uncomfortable with Linda's performance. Her distance from Emily no longer quite so absolute. Later that evening, Emily quietly began piecing together old wounds and hidden truths. She revisited childhood diaries she'd left hidden inside her closet, their pages quietly recording years of humiliation and blame. She found mail from her teachers, never delivered, tucked away in a drawer Linda had kept locked for years. Letters praising Emily's accomplishments and asking for meetings that never happened. The evidence of Linda's manipulations began to come together. Financial records with Emily's name scratched out, photographs missing from family albums, messages that had been intercepted, memories rewritten and retold. Alex, who had driven up to support her but stayed nearby so as not to overwhelm, offered gentle encouragement over the phone. "You're not the same girl you once were," he reminded her. "You have a right to the truth and to tell your story." Armed with these small but potent tokens of her childhood, Emily approached Chloe privately. In the quiet gloom of the backyard, she pleaded for honesty. "You saw a lot more than you ever said, didn't you?" Chloe hesitated, arms wrapped tight around herself. "I thought if I took your side, I'd lose Mom. But sometimes I knew she was lying. I didn't know how to say it." That confession was a wedge, breaking open shared stories. Emily encouraged her younger siblings to do the same. What began as whispers grew into open conversation. At breakfast the next day, with everyone gathered around the table, Emily spoke up for the first time, not in accusation, but with calm, determined clarity. She laid out the diaries, the letters, and quietly told her story of missing kindness, of gaslighting, of achievement stolen, and self-worth stripped away. She did not shout or heap blame. Instead, she simply told the truth, her voice unwavering. "I'm not here to start a fight. I'm here so no one else in this family has to carry the shame and confusion I did. I want Dad to know the real story." Linda interrupted constantly, trying to undermine Emily's evidence and paint her as vindictive. But the momentum had changed. Chloe, voice trembling but strong, vouched for Emily's memories, confirming missed birthdays, unfair punishments, kindnesses she'd witnessed Linda withhold. Even the younger siblings began to ask questions Linda couldn't easily answer. The confrontation forced the entire household into an uneasy reckoning. Her father, weak but lucid, listened to Emily and Chloe together. For the first time, he truly seemed to see and hear the daughters he'd failed to protect. He wept as Emily read aloud the letter from her teacher, a voice from the past bearing witness. In that moment, there was no defending the choices he had made. Linda retreated, her control fractured. She replied with indignation, but her words failed to land. Without the chorus of family support, her narrative sounded thin and brittle. The step-siblings' trust in her began to crack, as they saw the evidence and remembered the realities they'd tried to ignore. That night, Emily sat beside her father's bed and held his hand, both of them older and battered by the years. "I'm sorry, Emily. More than I can ever say," he whispered, tears cutting tracks in his cheeks. Emily, voice thick with both grief and resolution, replied, "I can't change the past. Neither can you. But at least now, we don't have to carry its weight alone." By the end of her visit, with the truth exposed, Emily felt not only vindicated, but powerfully free. Facing Petaluma and her family no longer meant facing her own shame. She had reclaimed her story, found courage in honesty, and given her siblings the strength to question what they'd always been told. When she left, Emily stood a little taller, carrying both her pain and her newfound peace with equal grace. For the first time, the walk away from her old home didn't feel like a retreat, but a triumph. The truth that exposed Emily's return to San Francisco was quieter than she anticipated. The city's noise and brightness pressed down on her like a wave after the tense stillness of Petaluma. It should have felt like a relief to step into her own kitchen, the smell of coffee and fresh bread erasing the stale hush of her father's house. And yet Emily found herself restless and unable to sleep, haunted not by imaginary ghosts, but by the pressing weight of unfinished business. There was more at stake than just reconciliation with the past. Emily now realized there were deeper wrongs to address, for herself and for everyone her stepmother's actions had harmed. It started with a message from Chloe a week after Emily's departure. "I've been thinking about what you said," Chloe wrote. "Some things don't add up. I want you to see something. Call me when you can." For years, Emily never would have imagined a time when her stepsister would reach out across the divide. Emily's hands shook slightly as she dialed, but Chloe picked up on the first ring. Their conversation began awkwardly, two adults cautiously navigating the ruins of a distorted childhood, but soon Chloe's words tumbled out. "I went through some of Mom's old files after you left," she confessed. "There were letters from your teachers and stuff about Dad's will. Things she hid on purpose." Emily's heart hammered at the mention of the will. She'd always suspected Linda might have been hiding something more serious than emotional abuse. As Chloe continued, it became clear the evidence went beyond ordinary family secrets. Mom manipulated things, money, inheritances, even memories. She convinced Dad you didn't want to be part of the family, Chloe admitted, regret heavy in her voice. In the following days, Chloe sent Emily copies and photographs, old bank statements, notes in Linda's sharp, unmistakable handwriting that outlined which assets to hide. Letters never delivered from friends and teachers, all expressing concern and offering help. The proof was overwhelming. But with each email, Emily felt her anger focus into purpose. It was time for the truth to come to light, not just within the walls of the family home, but in the wider circle that had once trusted Linda without question. Emily began connecting with people from her past, teachers, neighbors, even distant relatives. Many shared stories of awkward interactions with Linda, suspicions that she was rewriting history behind Emily's back. Mrs. Miller, Emily's old English teacher, remembered dropping off recommendation letters that had mysteriously never reached college counselors. Even the family lawyer, once close to Emily's father, recalled Linda insisting that certain mail be rerouted to her attention only. The more Emily uncovered, the clearer the shape of Linda's manipulations became. She wasn't just a cruel stepmother. She had controlled the family narrative to isolate and disempower Emily, even going so far as to cut her off from a share of her father's inheritance through deception and intimidation. With this mounting evidence, Emily realized she could not face this challenge alone. She met with a legal aid organization specializing in family and inheritance law, determined to explore her options. sitting in a small office across from a young attorney named Sophia. Emily felt a mix of dread and hope as she laid out stacks of printouts and carefully labeled folders. "You have a strong case for undue influence and fraud," Sophia said, her tone brisk but compassionate. "But there's also something bigger here. A need for vindication, for the truth to have an audience, not just a legal one." With Sophia's advice, Emily agreed to move forward with both legal action and, just as importantly, to set the narrative straight with the broader family and community. Over the next few months, the truth spread steadily. Initial reactions were mixed. Some relatives wanted to believe Linda's careful fictions. Others looked at the documentation and saw reality for the first time. When news of the coming legal challenge reached Petaluma, Linda's reputation faltered. Old friends who had once defended her now questioned her motives, especially as Chloe, trembling but resolute, supported Emily's recounting in front of the whole family council. Key moments stood out. A tense gathering at Emily's childhood home, where relatives arrived with questions and left in silence, eyes turned away from Linda's practiced tears. Chloe, voice clear for the first time in memory, described how Linda isolated her as well, how she had learned to parrot Linda's cruel words out of fear, not loyalty. Emily, meanwhile, refused to let shock or vengeance dictate her actions. As the case against Linda gained traction, she emphasized not only her own right to what she'd lost, her father's inheritance, personal mementos, and her name restored to family records, but also the psychological harm Linda had inflicted on all the children. "This isn't about tearing our family apart," Emily explained at the final mediation session. "It's about rebuilding it on honesty so the youngest among us don't inherit our silence." Support came from places Emily never expected. Sam, her old friend from high school, gave a statement about Linda's interventions that had cost Emily opportunities. Mrs. Patel, Emily's first employer, wrote a letter describing how Emily's after-school job was a lifeline during her years of isolation. Legal proceedings were slow but steady. In the end, a mediated agreement restored Emily's portion of her father's estate and required Linda to relinquish any further claim on behalf of herself or Chloe. For Emily, the material victory was less important than the way it forced Linda, at last, to face a room full of people who knew the truth. Her stepmother's authority dulled. Her voice no longer held sway, at home or in Petaluma's tightly knit community. For Chloe and the younger siblings, the experience was transformative. Chloe, once her mother's shadow, found space to apologize directly to Emily for the years she'd spent on the right side of Linda's wrath. Their conversation in a sunlit park, children playing in the distance, was painfully honest, but hopeful. "I wish I'd had your courage sooner," Chloe admitted. Emily squeezed her hand, neither forgiving nor forgetting, but recognizing the new growth in place of old fear. In the process of bringing truth to light, Emily's own healing accelerated. She attended therapy with her siblings and slowly began to imagine a form of family that could exist without secrecy or manipulation. She kept her distance from Linda, but encouraged the younger step-siblings to make their own decisions about their future relationships. When her father's health finally failed, Emily returned to Petaluma one last time. By now, the house felt different, lighter, almost empty of oppression. Her father, lucid in his final days, expressed the kind of remorse he'd never dared admit while under Linda's shadow. "I should have listened. I should have protected you," he whispered. Emily held his hand, tears silent but sincere. She let him know, finally, that she was at peace with the past, not because the hurt had vanished, but because she had survived it with integrity. The truth, once set free, became its own source of comfort. Emily's voice, long silenced, now rang out in community and family, reshaping not only how others saw her, but how she saw herself. The shadows that Linda had cast shrank beneath the glare of accountability. For the first time, Emily could breathe in the open, her head held high, not just as a survivor, but as the author of her own story. Justice and release. The air in San Francisco felt lighter, as though the city itself had shifted to make room for Emily's new sense of dignity. For years, the weight of Linda's deception and her family's silence had been an invisible chain. Now, with the truth exposed, each day brought another quiet slippage of those old restraints, like a lock rusting open after years of disuse. The legal battle stretched on for months, quietly but relentlessly. Emily worked closely with Sophia, her dedicated young attorney, collecting documents and sharing testimony with unwavering honesty. Each court date or mediation session brought its own wave of anxiety, but Emily faced them with growing determination. Not out of spite, but as an act of respect for herself and those who had been hurt by the family's lies. She attended every hearing, sat through every negotiation, and read every letter. Worn but unbowed, no longer intimidated by Linda's presence on the opposite bench. Linda, confronted by mounting evidence and the testimony of her own daughter, could do little more than maintain a stubborn, sullen silence. The courts reviewed bank records, falsified letters, and first-hand accounts from teachers, neighbors, and Chloe. Slowly, the story that had been hidden in whispers and locked drawers was pieced together in public view. The final court day dawned cold and foggy, the city shrouded in typical gray. Emily arrived early, nerves bundled beneath a coat she had bought years ago, the same one she'd worn when she first left Petaluma. This time, she wore it as armor, not as a shield for her uncertainty. The judge's decision was clear. Linda had exercised undue influence and deceit in her management of the estate. Emily's portion of her father's legacy, both financial and sentimental, would be restored. Family photos long hidden, letters from her mother, the old compass her father used to help her learn to read maps in childhood, all were to be returned. There was an official end to Linda's control, one recorded not just in legal documents, but in the public memory of Petaluma. But for Emily, the real victory was less tangible. She knew that justice did not erase the years she'd lost, or the pain suffered in silence, but it provided a foundation on which to build something better. She watched Linda's eyes as the ruling was read, and in those moments felt no desire for revenge, only a wary, tired thankfulness that the truth had at last been acknowledged. After the verdict, Chloe found her outside the courthouse, coat zipped to her chin, face blotched with tears. She handed Emily a small box. Inside were the spare keys to their childhood bike locks, once hidden away by Linda, and a little owl figurine from their mother's things. "You deserved all of this long ago. I'm sorry it took so much for us to get here," Chloe said, her words trembling but sincere. Emily accepted the gesture with a gentle squeeze of Chloe's hand, her heart filled not with anger, but with bittersweet hope. "You were a kid too. We all were," she replied. "We can only move forward now." Word of the case and Linda's downfall spread quickly across Petaluma's tight-knit neighborhoods. Some people stopped Emily on her rare returns, offering embarrassed apologies or expressions of admiration. Others, especially former friends of Linda, avoided her gaze in the supermarket aisles, but Emily no longer felt the need to explain herself. Her story, at last, was finally her own. Returning to her San Francisco apartment, Emily set about reclaiming her emotional landscape as well. She gave herself permission to grieve not just for the past, but for the family she should have had. The years lost to fear and manipulation. She began therapy with Chloe and the younger siblings when they were willing. unraveling the knots of memory and guilt that Linda had tied so tightly around all of them. Financial security, too, brought its own lessons. With her portion of her father's inheritance and the return of personal mementos, Emily felt the strangest sense of relief, a feeling she had often imagined but never truly experienced. She used part of the funds to pay off lingering student loans, create a small nest egg, and quietly fund a scholarship in her mother's name at her old high school, providing encouragement for girls facing hardship. Yet Emily's true liberation arrived not on a single triumphant day, but in the daily acts of rebuilding her life. She deepened her commitment to her work, now mentoring other young people at her biotech firm and raising her profile in outreach efforts to increase diversity in STEM fields. Her team thrived under her leadership, energized by her compassion and her refusal to let setbacks define their work. Her relationship with Alex grew stronger. He celebrated her victories, stood quietly by her side through setbacks, and created a new definition of home rooted in respect and kindness. Together, they fostered friendships rich with authenticity, where stories were shared honestly and laughter was abundant. Family, for Emily, was gradually redefined, not by blood or obligation, but by mutual care and trust. Emily maintained a gentle relationship with Chloe and the step-siblings, never demanding more than they could give. She encouraged them to discover who they were apart from their mother's shadow. Sometimes they met for coffee. Sometimes they sent short, honest messages, each one a small reclamation of possibility. As for Linda, Emily did not seek further contact. She understood now that forgiveness was not always about rekindling lost relationships or excusing harm, but about choosing to let go of the power that bitterness held. Linda would have to find her own way, if she ever could. Emily hoped, for the sake of the younger siblings, that the cycle of silence and control would finally end with their generation. The end of the legal battle did not mean the end of Emily's past. There were still moments, sometimes triggered by an old song or the scent of gardenias, that reminded her of both loss and survival. Yet these moments no longer froze her in place. Rather, they became milestones, proof of how far she had journeyed and of what she had overcome. One bright spring afternoon, Emily walked the campus of her old university for the first time in years, invited to speak to students about resilience and integrity. Her story was no longer just about suffering, but about the long, courageous process of seeking justice and choosing self-worth. Afterward, a young woman approached her in tears, whispering that Emily's words had given her hope. As the city lights flickered on that evening, Emily glanced at her reflection in a shop window. She saw not a survivor of injustice, but a builder of new beginnings. A woman transformed not in spite of adversity, but through it. Justice, Emily realized, was not only about compensation or recognition. It was about carving a path to freedom so that no one else would have to wander lost in the shadows she'd once known. And in the vast, exhilarating openness of her future, Emily at last allowed herself to rest, knowing she had become what she always hoped for: whole, at peace, and finally, free. Reflection and reconciliation. Years slip by, but some seasons return as vividly as the first time. For Emily, autumn in San Francisco always brings a peculiar nostalgia, a kind of gentle ache, sharpened by the way sunlight turns the streets golden and crisp. It's in these moments that she finds herself pausing on her walk home from work, watching children run beneath arching trees, hearing the distant laughter that echoes something from her own childhood. The city is not Petaluma, yet every so often, a single sensory detail, freshly cut grass, the scent of cinnamon from a bakery, pulls her back into the landscapes of her youth. Emily has built a life that's sturdy and quietly joyous. Her career has blossomed. Her biotech company now partners with community health initiatives, and the scholarship she funded in her mother's name continues to open doors for girls like she once was. Eager, overlooked, quietly resilient. Her closest friends have become a family all their own, and Alex, ever patient and steadfast, is now her husband. Their home, warm, cluttered with books and laughter, echoes with the patter of their young son's footsteps. Parenthood, at first, terrified Emily. The ghosts of her own childhood sometimes made her jump at her own sharp words or burst into tears after a hard day. But as months fell into years, she learned that love, when freely given, is a form of redemption. Yet the past has not vanished. It has changed its shape, softened around the edges. Sometimes, while reading to her son at night, she feels tears blur her vision, mourning her mother anew. On the harder days, Alex holds her quietly, letting the unspoken grief pass through them both. Together, they have made peace with being a family stitched together from loss, love, and hope. It is in the midst of this well-earned peace that an unexpected letter arrives. The handwriting is unfamiliar. The return address? Portland, Oregon. Emily almost tosses it aside, but curiosity tugs at her. She slices the envelope open at the kitchen counter while her son plays in the next room. Inside is a short, careful note. Dear Emily, I hope this finds you well, though I'm not sure how to begin. I'm Chloe's half-sister. My name is Megan. I grew up always hearing about you as someone distant and mysterious. I suppose you could call me your stepsister, though we've never met. For years, all I had were stories, most of them filtered through Linda's world. But things are different now. Chloe gave me your contact, and I wanted to thank you for helping her and for telling your truth. She says you and she are finally talking, honestly, about everything. That's new for her. Last year, when Dad died, so much changed. I just wanted to thank you for giving us all the courage to look at our family for what it really was. Maybe one day, our paths will cross. Until then, I hope you're happy. You deserve it. With respect, Emily rereads the letter, her heart swelling and aching in equal measure. The note is simple and sincere. She stares out her window at the city lights, feeling the invisible threads of family, old pains, yes, but also renewed connections, stretching and shifting into something kinder. That night, after Alex and their son are asleep, Emily reaches for her old journals. Years earlier, those pages bore the weight of survival. Silent suffering, fury, hope written down because it could not be spoken aloud. Flipping through them, she sees the arc of her life, the girl who endured cruelty, the teen who burned with resolve, the young woman who carved out freedom, and now, the adult whose wounds turned to wisdom. The next day, Emily calls Chloe for the first time in months. There's a pocket of nervous laughter before warmth rushes in. Chloe is living in Seattle now, working with foster youth, and for the first time, openly acknowledging their shared history. I got a letter, Emily says. From Megan? Chloe laughs, a new ease in her tone. She told me she might write. She's been asking about you ever since everything. They talk well past midnight, sharing childhood memories with the kind of clarity and gentleness that comes only after truth has been aired. They discuss their father, not as a myth, but as a man they both loved and lost too soon. A man whose failings once kept them apart. For the first time, they admit to envying one another. Chloe, the chosen daughter. jealous of Emily's independence. Emily the outcast, longing for the acceptance Chloe seemed to enjoy. Do you think forgiveness is really possible? Chloe asks quietly. Emily considers. I think it's more like letting go of the wish that things could have been perfect. Maybe it's allowing ourselves to build something better, even if it's small. Every honest conversation feels like a step. Emily writes back to Megan with care, briefly describing her own journey, expressing gratitude for the simple act of reaching out and wishing Megan the same peace she's come to claim. She offers an open invitation to meet someday, not as bearers of painful legacy, but as women, building something new from the scraps of the old. As weeks become months, Emily finds that reconciliation is a living thing, a process, not a single dramatic act. Sometimes she talks about her mother to her son, sharing quiet stories of kindness, using those threads to sew together generations. Other times, she and Alex visit Petaluma, wandering familiar streets with no need to stop at the old house. The town has changed. So has she. One clear November afternoon, Emily stands before a small audience at her former high school, presenting the first Marianne Chin Scholarship to a young student whose story of perseverance reminds her, achingly, of herself. After the applause fades, Emily lingers in the hallway. A woman's voice stops her. It is Mrs. Miller, her old English teacher. You changed this place, Emily, Mrs. Miller says, squeezing her hand. And not just with money. Kids here know now that it's okay to need help, to speak up. Emily finds herself blinking back tears. For all her hard-won accomplishments, it is this, making space for hope, that feels like true victory. In the quiet of her home that night, Emily reflects. Her journey is not about erasing sorrow or pretending away injustice. It is about tracing the hard, beautiful path from darkness into light, honoring the people she's helped and those who helped her, and, above all, knowing that survival is not the end, but a beginning. She no longer dreams of Linda's shadow or her father's disappointments. Instead, she dreams of what's possible, new traditions, letters passed between women who have learned to trust, lullabies sung in love and not in longing. In her arms, her son stirs. Emily presses a kiss to his hair, a silent promise that the story moving forward will be kinder. Against the odds, that is what she has chosen, again and again, to build. And in this gentle, hard-won peace, Emily claims the last and greatest freedom of all, to remember and to forgive.